Hello, fellow screenwriters. Welcome to one more magnificent episode of the Script Writing Tips. Today, we're gonna talk about the queen of all plot points, the midpoint. Midpoint is, drumroll please. Yep, you got it. The plot point in the middle of the story. Even though we're talking about 3 acts, the midpoint divides the second act into 2 equal parts. So the 3-act structure is basically 4 acts. The midpoint is not just the major plot point of Act 2, it is one of the most important plot points in the entire story. But before I move forward, allow me to repeat what's the most important element of the story structure. Never forget, the most important element is the story itself. Never forget that. Every story is different, so before you apply all those plot points we're talking about in the story structure series, listen. Listen carefully to the heartbeat of your own story. If you listen carefully, your story is going to reveal all of its secrets to you. What is the midpoint? The midpoint can be an event, an incident, or even a decision that the protagonist makes that raises the stakes and puts our protagonist to a point where there is no return. The protagonist can only go forward. That's why it is also called the point of no return. The midpoint can also be the point where the protagonist is having an introspective moment, a look at oneself, and even having an identity crisis or a question. According to many screenwriting analysts, in the midpoint, the protagonist has a false victory or a false defeat. Sometimes in the midpoint, we also find that the 2 major storylines of the story, or else the 2 major subplots, are crossing each other. Having said all of the above, let's start from the basics. Here's my method on how to find the midpoint in 2 steps. Step 1. The midpoint is always near the middle of the story. So calculate the middle of the story by dividing in half the total minutes of the film. But this is not enough, because the midpoint sometimes it can be 5 to 10 minutes sooner or later than the exact middle. That's why you also need to take step 2 as well. Try to think the story of the protagonist as a straight line and find where it begins and where it ends. If the beginning is A and the end is C, then what B is? What could be in the middle? Use your logic here and try to think what would rationally be in the middle. For example, in The Godfather, the protagonist, Michael Corleone, begins as a man who wants nothing to do with the mafia, and he likes to stay clean and decent.
That's my family, Katie. It's not me.
But in the end of the film, he has become the worst crime boss ever. He doesn't even hesitate to kill family members, his sister's husband, which is something that his father would never do. So in A, we have a very distant man, and in C, he has become the ultimate godfather. What do you think goes in the middle of such a journey from A to C, from good to bad? Yes, you're right, it's the first killing. The first time he commits a murder. In this first murder, one could say that he also has good reasons to do it. He's doing it as a defense to protect his father and his family, but it's still a murder. So in the middle, he's neither good nor bad. Something has changed now, something has cracked his personality, his integrity. This is the first step he takes towards becoming a bad person. The midpoint is always a point where the choice that the protagonist makes is important and cannot be undone. Once the protagonist comes in this step, he or she cannot go back. But in the midpoint, things also need to intensify, otherwise the story would be very boring from now on. That's why at this point the problems have to be renewed, the stakes need to be raised. Let's see some more examples. In Back to the Future, Marty in the beginning, in step 8, time travels to the past and he's trapped there. But in the end, in step C, he's back to his home, Back to the Future. So in the middle, he and his friend the Doc find out the solution, the way to go back to the future. Doc explains that with no plutonium, the only power source capable of generating the necessary gigawatts of electricity for the time machine is a bolt of lightning. That's where they realize that they can use the lightning that will strike at the town's courthouse clock. However, if this was the only thing happened in the middle, there would be a very boring second half of the story, which is not. Because at the same time they solve one problem, a new one is raised, even more crucial. They realize that going back is not the most important thing to worry about now. Since he already has interacted with his parents there, he has altered the future and now his very own existence is in danger and he has to fix things before he ceases to exist. That raises the stakes significantly. The two storylines, the one with the time travel and the other with his parents' story and their place in society, are now crossing. And by the end of the film, he's going to save himself, improve his parents' status quo, and get back to the future. In the beginning of the movie Jaws, a young woman gets killed by a shark and our protagonist, the police chief Martin Brody, wants to close the beaches to protect people. But the mayor of the town doesn't let him do it because he's afraid that they will have a major financial loss. In the end of the movie, Brody is in danger of the shark himself, and he manages to kill it and save his life. So in the middle of the story, when another shark attack on the 4th of July leads to one more death and Brody's son barely escapes with his life, Brody finally puts his foot down and demands Mayor to sign papers for hiring someone to kill the shark.
I don't know if I can do that without to hire Quinn to kill the shark. What? What are you talking about? Larry, the summer is over. You're the mayor of Shark City.
I hope it's more clear now. Thanks for watching. Another episode of the Story Structure series has come to its end. If you'd like to find out more about the inciting incident, the first turning point, or the beginning of Act 2, click the relevant links here, or you can also find them down below. Feel free to make a comment on this video or request a new. Thanks for watching. This is Apollonia and Script Writing Tips.